I'd like to just add my Happy New Year on to those that have come before me. It is great to see all of you here. And Rick, great job with the announcements. There are a lot of details. Puerto Rico, New York, you know. I do want to add a couple of announcements. I want to add one more detail to the Faith 250 event that's coming up here in just a few weeks. So there's a cap on the number of people from each faith community that are allowed to attend, just because there are 9 different faith communities involved. And so we need to sort of control the crowd a little bit, or else we're not going to be able to contain, the logistics will be a nightmare. But that said, we have 15 slots still available that have been allotted to Oak Brook as one of the sponsors for this first first event. So if that's something you'd like to be a part of, we'd love to have you join in. I think this is going to be a great event. As clergy, we have done each of these documents together amongst ourselves, and it's been some of the best conversations I've been a part of all year. You do discuss the documents, but it's really you tie them into our own lives. An important part of this event or series of events is to enable our people to build relationships with those from other faith communities, those who maybe believe differently than we do, who worship differently than we do. And so the questions and how the events will be guided will just really give you opportunities to learn a lot about those who you will be with, at your tables. Being that this first evening is focused on Emma Lazarus's poem, the sort of the history of immigration, as well as our own families' immigration and how we came to the United States, is a big part of this. And it was amazing just to hear the stories of the pastors around the table, that we had some whose ancestors had come over literally around the time of the Mayflower, all the way to clergy who had immigrated themselves into the United States, and everything in between. So it was fascinating stories. And those are the type of stories and things you'll be involved in and able to share, and if you become part of this event. So yeah, you can see me, John, at oakbrookchurch.org. Call me, whatever, and I'll make sure that you have everything you need to be a part of these events. The second announcement I have is also a really cool one. There's someone in our body here at Oak Brook who desires to be baptized, water baptized. And we want to open that up to the rest of the congregation, that if there are any of you who have thought about being baptized, if you've never been baptized, if maybe you were baptized as an infant and you want to be baptized as an adult, more than welcome to. If you just have questions about what is it all about, what does it entail, why do we do baptism, please come and see me. I'd love to talk to you more about this. And it would be really cool if we could get a whole bunch of us in the water on that same Sunday instead of just a couple of us. So if this is something that interests you, or again, if you just have questions, please see me. And then once we have a sense of how many want to be a part of it, then we'll look for a date that works for everyone and we'll get it on the schedule. For those of you who do not know, there's actually a pool underneath Corey's drum kit there. So we're going to have to move you that Sunday. Not sure how we'll do it, but I know you guys have done it before. So that'll be a wonderful Sunday, a Sunday of celebration. And so just see me if you'd like to learn more about it, okay? So we're in a new year, and Rick, Kathy, and I, we've been having some discussions about, what do we want to talk about next? And we've been doing series for the last year. And each of us have kind of built up a few sort of standalone single messages, things that we've wanted to share for some time. So we're going to take the next month and do some of these standalone one-off messages. And then in the February timeframe, we're looking at starting a series on discipleship, maybe with a little bit more of a focus on what does discipleship look like. I mean, we'll look back in Jesus' day and age to learn from it, but we're going to try to emphasize what might it look like today in our day and age, in our context. What might being a disciple look like? What would it involve? And so that'll be in the February timeframe, okay? So today's the first one-off message, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk about this subject a little bit before we get into it. And so here's the question I'm going to give you this morning to spend a little time with at your tables. Feel free to kind of group together and discuss this. How do people generally respond to suffering in their lives? How do people generally respond to suffering in their lives? Or you can personalize it if you want. How do you respond to suffering when you encounter it in your life? So please take 3 or 4 minutes with that question, and then we will pass around a microphone, and you'll be free to share anything that you feel led to share with the larger church body. We're going to bring it back together. Rick Schreiber has a microphone. Okay, how do people generally respond to suffering in their lives? If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, please raise your hand, and Rick will bring a microphone around to you. Any thoughts at all? How do people generally respond to suffering in their lives? Jacob.
So my gut reaction is normally to try to get myself out of the suffering or situation as quickly as possible. And then also at our table was discussed, sometimes people would try to mask or hide that they're in a state of suffering. So I thought that was very profound insight too from somebody who will go unnamed.
That's great. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, George. Anyone else? Erica.
So this made me think of a TV show that Salman and I watched a few years ago called Fleischman in Trouble. It's about a married couple, and the first half of the show is about one of their perspectives, and the second half is about the other perspective. And we talked a lot about it while we watched it, and instead of, keeping in mind their love for each other, they just kind of got wrapped in life, and they started placing blame on each other. And so when I think about suffering, I think about the fact that we typically end up wanting and needing to place blame somewhere, and we get angry, and I think we can get really wrapped up in that.
That's another very common response to suffering. That's great. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, Ashton.
Something that I was thinking about was suffering as like a group. And it's kind of weird because I feel like the response really shifts. When you're suffering alone, I feel like people often kind of like break down or, really just kind of fall apart. But when you're suffering as a group, like I think of just like a tough wrestling practice, that kind of makes you guys closer. But it could also be as extreme as like a country at war, or like a group over, like maybe like the Jews or something like that. How it really can make them so much closer and stronger. And just suffering with someone versus suffering alone, the difference there. And then also I was reading something about Job the other day, and this kind of made me think about that as well, and how he turned so much to God. But that's an individual, but it's still just cool that he was able to do that. But I don't think that that's the general person's response. I think it's easier to drift away than get closer. But I think that that's probably what we should be doing in those moments.
Yeah, so suffering is something that can cause those who are suffering to build closer bonds, closer relationships. And then second, there are those that turn to God in times of suffering. It's great. Thanks, Ashton. Anyone else? Anything else? Those are all good, and I touch I think on all of them in some way, shape, or form during this message. I think the cold reality of it is that suffering exists. Whether we like it or not, suffering is a reality, and that every one of us will face it in some way, shape, or form, and most of us will face quite a bit of it in a variety of different ways throughout our lives. I think Scripture makes this clear. Suffering is not something that is hidden in the Scriptures. Suffering is one of the deep themes that you see come up time and time again throughout both the Old and the New Testaments. It's interesting, when you look at the Buddhist faith, the first truth of which the whole faith is built upon is the fact that there is suffering. That's the starting point. That there is suffering in the world. And I think just even from hearing the responses here, that when we all take a look at our lives and look at the world around us, we can kind of readily agree that there is suffering, and we're all going to face it in some way, shape, or form. Now, this table right here had the question of, hard to talk about how do we respond to suffering. What exactly is suffering? And what do we define as suffering? How do we get our heads around it? So I'm going to try to sort of define it. It is an extremely broad topic. Also, some people suffer from things that others don't, but this is just going to be sort of a general view. Suffering is something that we face due to our own wants, desires, and needs, or attachments, or our clinging to things. That due to our deep attachments, the things that we want, the things that we desire, that actually leads to the fact or the source of suffering. Suffering can also come from what others do to us. It can come through our aversions, those things that we dislike, those things that cause us to get angry, those things that we hate or that we get bitter towards. We can all think of difficult periods of life, the passing of a spouse, a child, a parent, a dear friend, the loss of a marriage or a career, relational troubles with a significant other or with friends, financial challenges, excessive demands on our time, on our energy or resources by a boss or a workplace or really whatever it might be. Things that we don't want to deal with, things that don't interest us, past trauma, wounds that we carry with us throughout life and continue to cause pain over and over again whenever they come to the surface. Now, I believe that most often human beings will do anything they can to avoid suffering. I think, Jacob, you hit it right on the head right at the start. In fact, so much of the culture, the world in which we live, encourages us to do exactly that. That when suffering comes, to avoid it, evade it, run from it, medicate ourselves to it, distract ourselves from it, just ignore it, refuse to accept it, self-manage it, or try to control it, minimize it, and hide it. The issue is this generally brings about more suffering in our lives, not less. If the underlying causes aren't dealt with, it just continues to bring pain and misery in our lives. It doesn't matter how much we run, how much we try to hide from it, how much we medicate ourselves to it. And when I say medicate, that can be medicine, it can be substance abuse. Distracting ourselves from it is a big thing these days. We can just get lost in entertainment. We can get lost in hobbies, whatever it might be, just so we don't have to face or deal with that thing that hurts so much. What I do know is that when we try to avoid it or evade it, run from it, is that the healing that we really need, the relief that we really need, never comes. I think worse, and this is what Erica was getting at, is that when we're suffering, we're apt to project outwards from our own sort of unhealed and unresolved and undealt with pain. We tend to project it outwards. We export it. We don't want to feel the pain. We don't want to be the cause of the pain we're feeling, and so we try to point to others. We can point to a singular other. We can point to a people group as being the source or cause of the pain that we might be experiencing. One author talked about we're like electrical relay stations. That as the electricity comes in, it's just directed into all different directions. That is how very often we face our pain and our suffering. Just try to pass it on to someone else. I think it's inevitable that if we don't find a way to transform our pain, if we don't find a way to get healing, true healing from our pain, that we will transmit it eventually to others in some way, shape, or form. It may just be the venting. And very often the people that get hurt the most are those that are closest to us. They're the easiest targets. They're the ones we communicate with the most, that we see most. It's oftentimes easiest to vent and unload it on them. 2 years ago, I guess it was, I gave a message on scapegoating, which is very often the product of pain, suffering, unhappiness in one's life. It's projected and placed upon another, that they would have to pay the price, even though they might have absolutely nothing to do with why we're suffering, why we're feeling pain. You know, when I was in my 20s, I had a fairly long-term relationship coming out of high school that failed. I was deeply hurt by that. I didn't deal with it well. I tried to handle it on my own. I didn't know how to heal from things like that, and so I just projected it outwards. Throughout my 20s, I became a fighter, easily provoked, became a drinker, try to mask, medicate the pain. I know what it means to try to export my pain elsewhere. Hurt a lot of people back in my 20s. Definitely like a decade that I would love to do over if I could, roughly 18 to 28. But it's an outlet that I think is common to many. If I can't feel better, I'm just going to try to offload it onto others. And that's what ends up happening. You know, a big part of suffering is actually due to fear. We fear pain. We fear the pain we're going to feel, or we fear whatever the causes are of that pain. And so this is when we oftentimes spend our lives trying to mask it, as George had mentioned. In all of these responses, we don't end up ever getting the healing that we so desperately need. John wrote in his first letter that fear leads to, or another version says, fear involves torment. They who fear are not made whole, they're not made complete by love. When our lives are controlled by fear, it becomes extremely difficult to live a life of love towards others. And so very often, it's extremely difficult, and we think of the Christian life, of trying to minister to others when you have all kinds of unresolved stuff dealing within yourself. Because what you end up exporting sometimes isn't very healthy. It's a major part of the problem. I've learned about a woman named Etty Hillesum. She's a young Jewish mystic. She grew up in Amsterdam. And as she was growing up, she became exposed to philosophers like Carl Jung, and then she began to investigate deeper into Jewish mysticism, mysticism in Islam, and Christian mysticism. And she ended up coming to a place that even though she was put in a concentration camp, that she continued to love and serve those all around her throughout. And she was trying to write down things as she went. And one of the things she wrote down before her life was taken from her in 1943 in Auschwitz, she wrote that man suffers most through his fears of suffering. That we suffer most from our fears of suffering. Now, I want to say, before I go any deeper into this, just there are a couple of exceptions here, and so I want you to hear what I'm saying. I think this is really important. When I talk about not avoiding our pain, I'm not saying, like, don't go to a doctor when you're sick, all right? Like, if you have a headache, take the Tylenol. Like, that's not what I'm getting at here. Now, if it's your alcoholism that's causing you a headache, there might be something in there where you need to spend some time with God and have that sort of opened up to you. But just getting a headache, need to do what you need to do. I'm not talking about getting medical care here for sickness, for illness, for disability, etc. I'm also not talking about not taking measures to avoid threats to your own physical or emotional safety. I'm not saying that, oh, don't avoid that person who's physically or emotionally or sexually abusing you. That's not what I'm saying. It is highly and completely and entirely advisable, appropriate, acceptable to be avoiding that person or persons who are causing that in your life. So I need to kind of put those as set asides, as that's not what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at here today is that we need, each one of us, that we need to, I think, view our suffering in our lives a little bit differently maybe than we do now. That instead of trying to avoid it or medicate it or just run away from it, whatever our response is that we begin to see that suffering a bit differently and see that the suffering itself might be a doorway to our deepest transformation. That suffering might be a doorway to our deepest transformation. That maybe we shouldn't try to escape or avoid or to trying to get away from our pain until we know, until we understand till we've learned maybe what it's trying to teach us. That there may be pearls of wisdom in the suffering, that we need to enter into the suffering in order to learn what it is that we truly need. The writer Richard Rohr, who I admire highly, wrote, "When we can hold our pain consciously and trustfully and not project it elsewhere, we find ourselves in a very special liminal space. Here we're open to learning and breaking through to a much deeper level of faith and consciousness." Now, I fully admit, and probably agree with all of you, that this is really hard to do when we're in the midst of our suffering. Like, we just want to be delivered from it, whatever it is. I totally get that. And so what I'm suggesting, proposing today, is not an easy thing to do. By actually holding on to our suffering, by spending time with it, by looking deeply into it, it may feel like we're dying in many regards. Like, when we open up hidden compartments and closets in our lives, when we address those wounds, those scars that exist, it may feel like we're releasing control over our lives as we walk into these things. And in many ways, we are. I believe that God wants us to go down into our suffering courageously. That He wants us to enter into our suffering knowing that He's going with us. That He will be there and He will walk us through whatever it is that we're facing. That He'll never leave us. That He'll never forsake us. It may be difficult. It may be painful. But that He's going to guide us through it into a better place on the other side of it. And this better place that I'm talking about, it becomes better because we're going to know God better. We're going to know ourselves a whole lot better. But even more than that, we're going to know and understand and appreciate our oneness with God in a much deeper way as a result. Something happens when we walk through the hard times of life with God, that when we come out on the other side, God is not the same to us that He was prior to it. He becomes bigger, more faithful, more present, more merciful, more compassionate. He becomes more of our deliverer, our healer. He grows in our esteem. He is the good and loving Father. And He wants us to know this and experience this. We can know it by knowing that we call Him our Father in a prayer, but very often it's head knowledge. It's an intro to a prayer. But do we know it experientially? I believe that's what God desires to happen. This transformation I'm talking about is called by some the Paschal mystery. Paschal referring to the lamb, referring to Easter, the sacrificial lamb. This idea of that death precedes resurrection. That dying precedes being born again. That death leads to life. That descent leads to ascent. In fact, it's actually how the entire universe operates. This mystery of death and resurrection, and it's some of the hardest scriptures to read. It's ones we read, we're like, oh my goodness, he's calling me to lay down my life. Well, he calls us to lay down our life. So what? So we can pick it back up again. There's this dying that precedes the new life. There's this suffering that leads to healing. It's how this universe works that God has created. You think of Jesus' cross and his own resurrection. Scriptures tells us that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. He didn't run from it. He didn't try to avoid it, although he certainly was tempted to do so, as we seem to read in the Garden of Gethsemane. He didn't project his problems onto others. He didn't blame the Romans. He didn't blame the Jewish leaders. He forgave them. He obediently, again, for the joy set before him, he suffered, he died, and he rose, but he rose different than from the one who died. He rose transformed into new life, that same resurrection life that's promised for all. The pattern is that we would trust God wherever he leads us, no matter how difficult it is. And that transformation and healing lies ahead. Jesus said it in another place. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. New life is formed. It's the process which the Bible talks about. If this a dying that leads to resurrection and new life. You guys know the story of Jonah. Jesus, at one point in his ministry, he's surrounded by the the temple leaders, and he says, they're demanding a sign, a miracle from him. And he says, the only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah. And we think of the story of Jonah. God gives Jonah a mission. He's to preach to the Assyrian people of Nineveh, the enemies of Israel. And Jonah can't fathom preaching good news to his enemies. Can't even consider it. This is his pain, his suffering. He's called to do something that he doesn't want to do. And so what does he do? He runs. I mean, how many of us in our workplaces at times are given an assignment and we don't want to do it? Don't want to be a part of it? Or guys, how many times when you get a list of things to do at home do you want to run away? It's a common human reaction. So what does Jonah do? He tries to run away from God and his mission. And he boards a boat. Storm rises up. The sailors on board, they understand he's running from God, and they're like, we don't want you on this ship any longer, and they throw him overboard. He's swallowed up by a giant whale. Where did I put the clicker? There it is. Now, while Jonah's in the belly of the whale, he prays to God. God was with him there, as he's with all of us, no matter what we face. He says, in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. We see here again, descent leads to ascent. Later in chapter 2, after Jonah's still in the belly of the whale, he realizes that those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Spent some time with this verse yesterday. Clinging. When we attach ourselves to unhealthy things or things that are opposed to the will of God in our lives, so often lead to our suffering. And this word idols, we're used to thinking idols as being, these blocks of wood or stone or bronze or something that we bow down and pray to or whatever. But this word idols really means like empty or false vanities or futilities. These are the things we cling to, our fears, our prejudices, our desire to control our lives, our self-centeredness, our running away from our problems. When we live like this, we forfeit the grace. This is the word chesed in one of the great words of the Old Testament. We forfeit the loving kindness, the mercies, the healing, the new improved life that could be ours. Jesus points to this story of 3 days in the fish's belly as a foreshadowing of his own 3 days in the tomb and then his resurrection. There are points of time in our lives where life is going to lead us into the belly of the whale, into a place of suffering or struggle or doubt, pain, discomfort, uneasiness. It's a place we can't fix, we can't control it, we maybe can't even explain it or understand it, but it is our reality. Everything in us is screaming, run away, run away, run away. But in doing this, we're only clinging to empty vanities. And we're forfeiting the grace that could be ours. Quickly, Psalm 23, which is what the sermon was titled after, is a picture of the faithfulness of our God. A God who never leaves us. That even though I walk through the darkest valley, literally the valley of the shadow of death is what the words are, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It doesn't matter what pain, what suffering, what dark place, what dark valley we're going through in life, that God will walk us through it if we're willing to walk through it. God wants us to walk through those areas of struggle, of pain in our lives. We need not fear any evil in those times, for we know that God is with us, that his rod and his staff, that they comfort us. It goes on to say, you will prepare a table before me in the midst of my enemies. This table, the table in the Middle East is a table of reconciliation. It's a table of peacemaking. It's a place where enemies are made one. When we journey into our suffering with God, he will bring us into the healing that we need. He goes on to say, you anoint my head with oil, which is really an Old Testament. It's a Hebrew picture of being anointed with the Holy Spirit, that God will be present in our lives. Literally you think of being anointed with oil, being poured over your head. That's how present God makes himself when we walk through our times of suffering. And surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We dwell in God always, and God dwells in us always. That is a promise to us. So, where am I going with this? We need to see our suffering in a strange way as a gift, that there's something in it. Maybe we don't even recognize it. We don't understand what it is, but as we walk through it, we will learn something about ourselves and something big we will learn about God, and it will be a doorway to growth and transformation. And we need to remember that God doesn't put this suffering on us. That's taught in some churches. That God doesn't put suffering on us to try to work out our kinks and things. That's not what a loving Father does. But a loving Father walks with us through life, that as we encounter suffering, the good and loving Father wants to walk with us through the suffering so that we can truly be made whole, be made well as we work through it. When my kids are hurting, I don't want them to run from their problems. I don't want them to medicate their problems. I don't want them to project it on other people. I would rather walk with them and walk through it, no matter how hard it is. And I guarantee you on the other side that my relationship with my kids will be far deeper than it was before we started. It's no different with God. I don't have time to go into a bunch of this. It goes into more detail. I do want to share one tip in your process in doing this, and then we'll have communion. So, I've been teaching here at the church on contemplative prayer for over the past year. And there is nothing that I've ever engaged in that has helped me more in more ways in my faith than in this practice. Contemplative prayer, if you don't know what it is just finding a time during the day of sitting in silence and sitting in the presence of God, getting past our minds and all the distractions of thoughts and the whirlwind that's going on in our brains at all times, getting past that and sitting in God's presence. During that time, God brings about all kinds of change in our lives. You're allowing God to have free access to your mind, and you're saying, God, have your way. And he does. He does. It requires giving up trying to control. But it's amazing the things that he'll address, that he'll bring to the surface, that he'll walk through with you if you give them the chance. Two things I'll share. I haven't talked much about this with anyone, a little bit. So, in my many trips to Israel, Palestine, back in the 2010 to 2017 timeframe, I witnessed and experienced some really bad things. Some were done to me. Others were done to others around me. Around 2015, I started to have awful, awful night terrors. Nightmares in which I would literally die in the nightmares. And it would be that act that would wake me up screaming, yelling. I would never talk about them because it would just keep bringing it back to the surface. So I was just trying to stuff those experiences. I just didn't want to address them. But as far as I know and remember, and I have not had one in the past year and a half. A year and a half ago, I started with this prayer. It gave me enough courage to talk about it. It's given me enough hope that it won't return, that this is something that's in the past and it doesn't need to haunt me. God will meet us, and he'll walk us through the things that are hurting us, that are causing us pain and suffering. Another one that's less severe, but maybe as important because it's a major part of life. And a major part of life is conflict and confrontation. And for those who know me the best, know that I have run from conflict and confrontation for many, 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 many years. I don't like it. I'm always afraid of getting hurt. I'm afraid that I will hurt others, especially those I care about, and so I don't like it. And this is a work in progress, but over the past year and a half, for the first times in my life, I feel like I have had the strength to actually address things, to speak into things, to share my heart, to not just go along with the flow so that hypothetical bad things might not happen. And I attribute this also to this kind of prayer. I share these with you just to say that God wants to heal us. God doesn't want us to suffer. And he knows that if the way that the world teaches us to deal with our pain and suffering is not healthy and only leads to more pain and more despair and more heartache. And I guess there's probably no better way to go into having communion than having our eyes set upon the one who's willing to lay down his life in love, showing us how far he'll go in loving us and forgiving us, that he'll go all the way. So if the servers could come forward, please. I apologize, we've gone over as usual. You know, one of the amazing things at the cross is that at the cross we see that this God that we follow, this God that we love, doesn't stand off at a distance and observe us in our suffering and in our pain. That this God will come so close that he'll put on human flesh and he'll come down and he'll suffer right alongside of us. In fact, he'll suffer for us. That this is the God that we know. This is the God that we can trust. In communion, we voluntarily associate ourselves and even identify ourselves with Jesus. I mean, that's, I think, in the word, communion with, come with, union, together, togetherness, oneness with God and with each other. It's a beautiful picture in the form of a meal. of our oneness with him. That God and we in him. And it's in this oneness that we can be assured. He will walk with us and guide us through all of our suffering and all of our pain. Jesus said to his disciples, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you. I always imagine Jesus sitting at the table and looking in the eyes of each of his disciples as he says that. It's as if it's like a personal invitation. I think today this is a personal invitation of his to each one of us. And today, before we take this, I want you to reflect on these words of your oneness with God. That there's no separation. And that no matter what you face, no matter how you suffer, no matter what pain you've been trying to mask or medicate or run away from, this is a reminder that Jesus is with us. So he said on the night that he was betrayed, that he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it. And he said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. Lord, I thank you. I thank you that you are the good shepherd. The shepherd that never leaves the flock. That when one's lost, he'll leave the 99 to go find the one. That every single one of us matters to you. We thank you that you'll never leave us, you'll never forsake us, and that no matter what we face, that you will walk with us through it, and that you will show us the causes, you'll show us the way, and you promise us that on the other side, that there is victory, that there is healing, that there is wholeness, that there is peace. We thank you that you desire us to be in a better place in which we would shine forth in our world, that we would live out the lives that you desire us to live, and that you desire us to have. We thank you for your great, great love. In Jesus' name, amen.